This man, Gordon Kahl, killed two federal marshals in a shootout and in turn was shot and burned to death after a nationwide manhunt 12 years ago.
And this was a really big flashpoint in the far right. I think the very next month, the Aryan nations had their World Congress. He gets up, he cites Gordon Kahl, saying, "This is war. We're going to war against the federal government."
Ken is one of the only journalists that is really digging deep and covering PATCON.
And this is when the FBI starts gearing up its really hardcore infiltration, or I would argue provocation operations.
If it seemed like war yesterday, the reinforcements showed up tonight. At the center of it all, of course, is the bombed-out shell of the federal office building.
The reason that the truck exploded outside is because McVeigh was going to park it, and then he would have gotten arrested by agents who were waiting down there. And Strassmeir told me the same thing in our interview. He said, the truck was too big to fit, and then so McVeigh just parked it next to the building, and it actually went off, and agents had been waiting.
All right, we are joined today by Ken Silva. Now, Ken Silva, I wanted to reach out to because according to Jesse Trentadue, Ken is one of the only journalists that is really digging deep and covering PATCON. PATCON, of course, in this Oklahoma City series is Patriot conspiracy. So we're going to learn a bit of the history of PATCON and how it maybe even can affect today. How are you doing today, Ken?
Oh, I'm doing very well. Thanks very much for having me.
It's an honor to have you, and I really am looking forward to learning more about this. I've been covering the Oklahoma City bombing. I got this book sent to me by Margaret Roberts, and my life has been completely consumed now with the Oklahoma City bombing, and PATCON apparently ties directly in and may have, in fact, even been a PATCON operation. So can we step back in time and look at the origins?
Yeah, just a broad history. PATCON was an undercover operation in the 90s where the FBI infiltrated militias and under other far-right groups. Whistleblowers have alleged that it actually was an operation to incite violence. And we'll get into the details of that later. But yeah, broadly, so I would actually put the origins all the way back to a tax protester named Gordon Kahl. I don't know if the name is familiar
No.
at all, but he was actually a World War II veteran, came back to America and was really disillusioned with what he saw undergoing in the 60s and 70s. And at some point, he decided that he was going to be a tax protester and refused to pay or file his federal income taxes. He was a farmer up in North Dakota, and he got away with it for years until he started going on public access television and telling people to follow him. He started, creating a movement, and the IRS threw him in prison in the 70s. And while in prison, he suffered 2 heart attacks. He believes that maybe the government caused it. I don't know if that's true, but I could tell you that he definitely believed that. So when he got out of jail, he vowed that he's never going back, but he was still very adamant about not paying taxes or not even filing. Among other reasons, he was objecting to the fact that it was funding abortions. Um,
Is he a sovereign citizen? I'm just curious. Is
he
that
was
his?
tied to that movement. I don't know if he would consider himself a sovereign citizen, but back then, yeah, they made like legalistic arguments saying like the income tax isn't constitutional and things like that. So it's pretty closely related. He was actually part of like the posse comitatus, which is the notion that the county is the most autonomous, important form of government in the country. Pretty much, he was saying like his local county should be totally sovereign from the rest of the country when it came to almost all matters. Uh,
States' rights oriented guy.
Sure, sure. Even smaller than states' rights. He wasn't a fan of his state either, as we'll come to find out. Because in the early '80s, he had kind of a cordial relationship with the local U.S. Marshal, but that guy got replaced, and they decided in '83 that they were going to make an example of Gordon Kahl. The Marshal set up a roadblock. He was coming out of church with a bunch of, I think, his son and a couple other people. The marshals tried to pull him over because there was a warrant out for his arrest that had been out for years, but finally decided that they're going to make an example. It's kind of a similar thing that they did with David Koresh, where they could have made the arrest a lot more.
When he was out jogging, they could have just picked
Yeah,
him up.
exactly. They could have done this while Gordon Kahl was at the grocery store or something like that, but they have to set up this giant roadblock. North Dakota is very flat, so they see it from a mile away. They try to turn around, but some unmarked marshals vehicles that had been tailing them uh, cut them off. A standoff ensued, and long story short, Gordon Kahl ends up killing, I think, 3 marshals and maybe a local officer too. Um, and incredibly, he gets away. His brother or his son and a couple other people were eventually detained. 2 of these guys are actually still in prison over this. But eventually, he's on the lam for about 6 months until the FBI finally hunts him down.
And burns him alive. Is he the
Yeah.
one who got burned alive? Okay, I
Yes.
didn't put the name together.
I think they wanted me to fill out income tax papers, and I told them nothing doing. I wouldn't.
This man, Gordon Kahl, killed 2 federal marshals in a shootout and in turn was shot and burned to death after a nationwide manhunt 12 years ago.
Yeah, that's right. So they pretty much Waco'd him, and this was a really big flashpoint in the far right. I think the very next month, the Aryan nations had their World Congress, and that's when a guy named Louis Beam, who's a former KKK Grand Dragon, he gets up, he cites Gordon Kahl, saying, "This is war. We're going to war against the federal government." And at the time, a lot of people really, I think, legitimately thought that what happened to Gordon was going to happen to the rest of them. So out of this 1983 Aryan Nations World Congress springs the Order, which was a offshoot of the Aryan Nations. That's its goal was specifically to rob banks in order to fund the radical right wing movement. And this is where CSA comes to play. I think at least one of the CSA guys was the Order's armorer. He converted their guns to automatic weapons, supplied them with a lot of,
Kerry Noble was in the mix on this, right?
yeah, Kerry Noble of CSA fame was also tied.
And James Ellison was the head of CSA, a preacher himself or something.
Yeah, I don't think those guys were directly involved in the Order's violent activities. I think it was a guy named Randall Rader, who was like a pretty tough military guy, was able to make machine guns. He made the machine gun that was used to assassinate a Jewish radio host.
Alan Berg.
Alan Berg, yep.
Nearly anyone in Denver 20 years ago recalls the shock the night Alan Berg was killed. He was walking into his condo at 1445 Adams Street. Waiting outside were men with an agenda against Jews and blacks.
Alan Berg on KOL.
Berg was well known for using his talk show to taunt bigots and racists.
The Order goes on to rob about $2.5 million from banks, funds a lot of Aryan Nations groups, KKK, other groups around the country. They assassinate a Jewish radio host. And from what I tell, this group is mostly organic. It was not something like set up by the FBI. These were true believers. And it was actually the DOJ did a pretty good job taking them down. They had 2 separate trials. We refer to them loosely as Order 1, Order 2. One was focused on the murder of Alan Berg. It was a civil rights case. The other was, I think they ended up prosecuting like a couple dozen guys who were tied to the bank robbery operations. But then the DOJ got a bit overzealous, and they tried to put away pretty much all the leaders of the radical right wing movement.
Now, I want to capture a couple things real quickly because
Yeah, go ahead.
April 19th is, I think, a very big deal to cover Patriots Day, because there's like a running theme here. And I believe in 83, there was a Patriots Day raid, right? April 19th, 1983. Is that when they did the arrests of all these people for the sedition trials? Or am I missing something?
That was actually when they took down the CSA. I
Okay.
think they had gotten it. Uh, I think one of the guys had killed a state trooper. They had gotten tips that they were going to try to
That was Richard Snell.
Richard Snell, who that no, that he was almost
April 19th again.
executed on April 19th.
Yes.
That comes into play, but it was April 19th. I want to say 84, 85. When
Okay, so I'm jumping ahead of you. I apologize.
Oh, no, you're actually right on track. It's a little bit of a like CSA isn't directly tied to what I'm talking about, but this was part of the DOJ's, I would say, legitimate law enforcement activities of rolling the actual bad guys within this movement. But after all that, after they shut down the CSA, they want to charge the broader movement, every leader, with sedition. And they tie this back to the 1983 Aryan Nations World Congress, where a bunch of people signed a declaration. But it was a pretty dubious case. It was hinged on James Ellison, who had gotten arrested for CSA. And he was kind of like their FBI informant, their turned state's witness, who ratted on a lot of these guys and said they were conspiring to overthrow the government. Uh,
Mm.
Long story short, the case collapses. This is 87 in Fort Smith, Arkansas. They had 8 guys on trial, and they were all acquitted, including Louis Beam, the former KKK Grand Dragon. He comes out of the courthouse. His wife collapses in his arms.
The first serious setback in the federal government's war against suspected white supremacist groups. 13 defendants were found not guilty of all charges, which included murder, robbery, and conspiracy to overthrow the government.
They go across the street. They raise the Confederate flag. Like, they really rubbed it into the DOJ's face. And so some researchers suggest that PATCON was born out of this. I think the very next year, the guy named Andreas Strassmeir enters the country, and this is when the FBI starts gearing up its really hardcore infiltration, or I would argue provocation operations, where they're trying to actually provoke these guys to violence. And specifically, PATCON is predicated on the notion that in the early 90s, that the radical right was going to start the order again and start robbing banks to fund another right-wing movement, which is kind of what happened. But
To jump in a little bit, I'm because I want to make sure I don't miss any steps possible.
yeah,
The order now, was William Luther Pierce tied in with the order?
not that I know of. He was the guy that wrote the Turner Diaries.
Correct.
So he might have been an inspiration, but he wasn't, as far as I know, he wasn't directly involved.
Okay. He wrote the Turner Diaries in like 77, 78. And I bring him up in the Turner Diaries because they come up again and again and again, including the truck bombing aspect of it. And Timothy McVeigh's favorite book, apparently, and they were going around. And you can confirm this, but from my understanding, the FBI literally had an operation with Ryder trucks and explosives that they keep offering to different people. Like, hey, you want to blow some stuff up? We got a truck, we got explosives, let's do it.
Yeah, I haven't actually confirmed that. I've heard the similar reports, but I'm actually not aware of that
Okay.
that being the case for sure. I know, they tried to do that in the first World Trade Center attack too, so it seemed to be a common thing. But from what I've heard, my research has gleaned is that they were trying to start it was like mostly the bank robbery aspect.
The ARA, the Aryan Republican Army.
Yeah, so the FBI actually had an official front group that was run by 3 undercover agents. It was called the Veterans Aryan Movement, and it was very similar to the ARA, but I think the ARA had some actual true believers in it, and they were the ones that actually robbed banks. This veteran Aryan movement, I don't think was involved in any actual robberies, but they kind of traveled from gun show to gun show, from town to town, telling the local that yes, we're involved in this. We could get you money, blah blah blah. This is all the
Now, were
information.
they the ATF? And just to fill in the blank, from what I understand, the ATF had informants going to all the gun shows, and they would just kind of look around the parking lot, write down everybody's license plate number, and collect lists. Look them up and build lists.
Yeah, this was a joint operation actually that was run out of Maine Justice. So the ATF was involved, but the lead was the FBI. There was an undercover agent. We know it. I don't know his real name, but his name in the documents is David Rossi, and he would go around trying to, um, you know, offer weapons for Stinger missiles and night vision goggles, which is like the only case that they actually made. They bought some stolen night vision goggles and eventually arrested another one of the targets, named Tom Posey. So, but going back to the bank robbery aspect, there was an FBI informant named Vince Reed, and he was kind of the main informant involved in this. And he was an old head from the 80s, and he would go around to the various Aryan Nation groups and try to get them to start up the order again. And the reason, actually, we know this for sure, that it's a provocation operation. Like, if you read the FBI documents, it'll say, oh, we're worried that these guys are starting up the order. But there's actually a book um, written by a former FBI agent and his informant. It's called Into the Devil's Den, and it came out in the thousands. And they quote Vince Reed as a provocateur, like telling people we got to start up the order. So it's pretty interesting that it seems like the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing, and this book inadvertently reveals that one of its own informants, Vince Reed, was an agent provocateur, which I think is quite humorous, actually.
And unfortunately, I think Hall has passed away. And that's part of the reason I'm racing with this, is to try to get as many people who are around, as possible, to interview, talk to, things like that.
Oh, really? Okay, I wasn't aware of that. Yeah, I would have loved to talk to that guy for sure.
Oh, definitely.
That,
Definitely. Just to get an idea of what's going on in there. But yeah.
yeah. So I would compare this operation kind of to Fast and Furious. I think a lot of people are familiar with that in like the late 2000s. The ATF was purposely allowing straw buyers to purchase guns illegally, to try to track them to the cartels. And in this case, I think they were trying to get people to rob banks to track the money to the various right wing groups. And then they were all going to roll up the entire right wing. But it kind of went sideways, and resulted in, I would argue, the Oklahoma City bombing.
In late 2009, ATF agents in Phoenix noticed a flurry of gun purchases in the United States by suspected traffickers from Mexican drug cartels, including giant .50 caliber rifles. But instead of stopping the weapons, agents say their superiors ordered them to let the guns cross the border. It's called gun walking, to see where they ended up and see if they would lead to a major drug cartel leader. Agents videotaped suspected dealers from Mexican drug cartels buying weapons. The case grew to include thousands of weapons. Then, in December 2010, 2 Fast and Furious rifles turned up at the murder of a Border Patrol agent in Arizona, Brian Terry. The Justice Department publicly insisted no gun walking had gone on. That denial prompted one of the lead agents on the case, John Dodson, to step forward and speak to CBS News.
Here I am. Tell me I didn't do the things that I did. Tell me you didn't order me to do the things that I did. Tell me it didn't happen. Now you have a name on it, you have a face to put with it. Here I am, someone now. Tell me it didn't happen.
While we're on the ARA, I have to compliment you on your shirt, which is very interesting.
Yeah,
Is that an Easter egg there?
I just saw this, figured I'd throw it on. It's Brescia University, which I got at some Chamber of Commerce meeting in Kentucky, but it does remind me of one of the bank robbers whenever I see this shirt, Michael Brescia.
And Michael Brescia comes into the picture because of the ARA robbing the banks and a very distinct similarity to John Doe number 2 with a lot of images. Now, there's dispute about his having red hair, but oddly enough, I've been digging up pictures of him at the time. He didn't have red hair; he had black hair, and in a lot of the pictures, he actually looks swarthy, if you will, and it doesn't help the case because a lot of people are saying, including Andreas Strassmeir, who you interviewed, oh, he had red hair and freckles and looked nothing like that. Well, these pictures do tell a different story. So
Yeah,
that's interesting.
certainly Michael Brescia's mugshot is a dead ringer for the sketch of John Doe too. It's quite striking, but this isn't the only reason we think the ARA is tied to the Oklahoma City bombing. Uh,
Yes.
the
Elohim.
the nexus is white supremacist property in the Ozarks called Elohim City, which is where the ARA would hang out. They are pretty prolific bank robbers in the Midwest. I think they robbed at least 18, scored over $1 million, but they would hide out at this Elohim City. And the significance of that is there was an ATF informant there named Carol Howe. And she actually warned her handlers that these white supremacists were planning to blow up federal buildings in the early 90s. And with the reason we know this is legitimate is because her handler, she was later charged with having explosives, but her handler testified on the stand that yes, it was legitimate. She did warn us that these white supremacists were casing federal buildings. This is like February 95, and 2 months later, the bombing happens. Um,
Before we go too deep on that, it's very relevant about their casing, specifically the Murrah building, sorry, because Richard Snell, going back to time, the gentleman who killed the state trooper, he wanted, or James Ellison, someone in that mix, they wanted to blow up that specific building back in 83. And I believe Carrie Noble reported that somebody got harmed when they were building the bomb and they determined, okay, you know what, maybe it's a bad idea. That's a sign from God that blowing up this building, bad idea. However, coincidentally, Richard Snell, who was tied in with that mix, executed the same day as the bombing.
Yeah, and CSA was closely related to Elohim City. A lot of those guys ended up there after the raid. In fact, after the bombing, the FBI sent James Ellison back to the property as an informant to try to figure out, dig up some intelligence for them. So, yeah, there's very close ties between those two properties. Um, and moreover,
How far away? I mean, I believe the CSA, the original compound for that was in Arkansas, and Elohim City is in Oklahoma, but like the last possible exit before you hit the state line, from what I understand, going to Arkansas. So they geographically moderately near?
yes, in fact, one of the lawyers involved in the '87 sedition trial, Kirk Lyons, he actually stayed at Elohim City for a while, and he would drive to Fort Smith, Arkansas, for the trial, and he described it as a miserable experience. I guess it was a pretty long drive. And Elohim City in the winter is freezing cold. You'd have to go outside to go to the bathroom, like cold showers and everything. So he doesn't remember it fondly, but all those people in that area were within driving distance for sure. Um, so I guess let me,
Yeah, we can go back now to Carol Howe. I just wanted to fill in some of the pieces in there because Carol Howe is obviously super important. I believe she reported that she did in fact see Tim McVeigh at Elohim City, and also was in a relationship with Dennis Mahon, who was a bomb builder himself, in prison for it right now, and was trying to hook up with Andreas Strassmeir.
yeah, and we know her reports about seeing McVeigh are authentic, according to a relative who spoke to John Ronson, who's a journalist for a podcast that came out earlier this year when Carol Howe turned up dead in Tennessee. Interviewed one of her cousins who actually did not have nice things to say about Carol. She said she was crazy. She was the black sheep of the family. However, it was the Christmas of '94. They were all together, and the cousin was having a child, and she's like, "We want to have the middle name be McVeigh." And I guess that was an ode to like some grandpa in the family. And Carol Howe says, "Oh, I don't think you want to name it that because that's going to be an infamous name before long." And so I do believe that's a true story because everything else the cousin said about Carol Howe was pretty disparaging. So I don't think she tried to legitimize her just because, she liked her or anything like that. So that's a pretty interesting story. And then we also have McVeigh. We have records of him calling Elohim City. He met Andreas Strassmeir at a gun show in '93 after Waco. And Strassmeir gave him his card. I guess they commiserated about how terrible Waco was. And according to Strassmeir, that's the only time he ever met McVeigh. But oddly enough, a week before the bombing, we have McVeigh calling Elohim City, asking for Strassmeir. That came out in FBI documents years later.
And he had a ticket near Elohim City as well.
Yes, that's true. He also had a speeding ticket. So there's so many connections, and a lot of people, the logical question was, well, if these white supremacist bank robbers were tied to the Oklahoma City bombing, why wouldn't the DOJ just charge them for that? Which, is a really good question. And I think the most reasonable explanation is because this bank robbery group was totally infiltrated. In fact, the guy who founded it, his name at the time was Peter Langan, and he's got a whole interesting story. He's the son of a CIA officer, kind of a problem child, struggled with his sexuality in the '80s, goes full Nazi. Him and his friend Richard Lee Guthrie were robbing, I think they robbed a Pizza Hut in Georgia, and Langan got busted for it, got thrown in jail, and Guthrie was still on the loose, and Guthrie was making threats to President at the time, H.W. Bush, and I think Bill Clinton too. And so the Secret Service came to the jail and said, if you help us catch Guthrie, we'll get you out of jail. Your record will be totally clean. And it was pretty much a deal too good for Langan to pass up, except he went totally rogue. At least the official story is that the Secret Service lost track of him. He goes on to form the ARA, and then they become the most prolific bank robbery gang of the '90s. And so if the DOJ actually would have prosecuted these guys for the Oklahoma City bombing, they would have had to admit that, oops, we sprung our own informant out of jail and that he kind of, caused all this. So,
Of course, that's the official narrative.
yeah.
There are very distinct questions that have come up from FBI whistleblowers saying specifically, and we'll throw John Matthews into the mix, I guess, that that was the ARA was in fact an operation, according to what he put out. It was an operation. They knew it. They were running it. And again, it was similar to the order, get the money and let the money dissipate everywhere. Like later with guns, track money, track guns, parallel Eric Holder. He's in the mix. So there's definitely some weird ties there. Also, Richard Lee Guthrie brings in Kenneth Trentadue, and I've interviewed Jesse Trentadue's brother, but that's how we're kind of tying all this in. Timothy McVeigh, from what I understand, told David Paul Hammer and other people like Kerry Nichols that the ARA was his crew, and they ran support for him on April 19th and the days before in Oklahoma City. Am I off so far? Or Is this
Uh,
accurate?
yeah, everything you said is correct according to the reports we have. I don't know if McVeigh was telling the truth when he said that. I mean, we also have accounts where he was only the driver, he was a minor soldier, and the real sophisticated people were guys like Guthrie. But to your point about this being some type of Fast and Furious type operation, that actually not only comes from John Matthews, but a Cincinnati police officer named Matt Moaning, who knew Langan and Guthrie in the 90s. And he would always try to get the FBI to arrest them. And the FBI just wasn't interested. He pretty much, the local police there had Langan and Guthrie dead to rights for all these bank robberies. And it's according to Moaning, he eventually was told by an FBI agent that we're following the money. We're letting these guys operate because we're going to see who they pay, and then we're going to roll up the entire nationwide network. And then it was after the bombing happens, Matt Moaning actually gets hit with some BS charges for like misusing a computer. It's like the Cyber Crimes Act, but it's really like if you use a government computer for something uh, that you're not supposed to do, you could be charged with it. So they use that against him. He eventually washes out out of the force, and they do that to totally, I guess, discredit him as a whistleblower. And he's in stories. I think it's called like the Queen City Chronicle or something. The reporter is Leslie Blade, a local Cincinnati reporter who did a number of uh, great stories on this. Um, so yeah, if you Google Leslie Blade and Matt Moaning, it should come right up. So we have his accounts of this being a Fast and Furious operation. And then we also have John Matthews, who was an undercover informant who was part of PATCON. And he later said that he believed it was an incitement operation. And he actually saw McVeigh with Andreas Strassmeir at a militia training exercise at San Saba, Texas. And he went on to tell his handlers after the bombing that, oh, I saw this McVeigh guy with Strassmeir. And his handler said, like, oh, we know that. We're on it. And to that, John Matthews took that to mean that they had been actually monitoring McVeigh up until the attack.
On your, I want to say headline news, Headline USA channel on YouTube, by the way, it's about to hit 1,000 folks. Go subscribe, get them over the number. You interviewed Andreas Strassmeir, and his responses about that were very interesting to me because he denied ever being with McVeigh, but he didn't deny being in Texas, and he was a little squirrely, or I don't know the best way to put it, but he didn't deny Manning. He admitted he could have seen him. He was asking you if it was near Austin. So I kind of felt that was an interesting, uncomfortable patch of the interview where he seemed to be looking for information from you rather than being forthcoming himself.
Yeah, and he kind of knocked down a straw man to counter me. There's a rumor where some of his militia buddies there say they saw Strassmeir enter a federal building using the keypad. And he's like, oh, no, that totally wasn't me. That's preposterous. And I actually believe him. I think the notion that Strassmeir was like typing into a federal building with a keypad and then they saw him, I think that's kind of dubious. But that's kind of an aside because he admitted I think the biggest revelation from my interview is that he admitted that his friend Dave Holloway, who was also in this militia, was a former CIA pilot from Iran Contra. And Dave Holloway is the guy that helped Strassmeir escape the country after the bombing. So pretty much he's admitting that the CIA asset helped him get out of the country. And yeah, Dave Holloway is a super interesting guy. He worked with the Cause Foundation with Strassmeir, which was this kind of the white supremacist version of the ACLU. They specifically represented people in the Klan and things like that. But Dave Holloway was later quoted in FBI records saying that he thinks that the reason that the truck exploded outside is because McVeigh was going to park it in under the Murrah building, and then he would have gotten arrested by agents who were waiting down there. And Strassmeir told me the same thing in our interview. He said, you know, the truck was too big to fit, and then so McVeigh just parked it next to the building, and it actually went off. And agents had been waiting to arrest him if he would have
That
pulled.
really makes a ton of sense. And hearing the multiple sources on it, I will tell you that my working theory, since I've been doing this, and so far nothing has knocked me off of it, is that it was a botched sting operation. That essentially you have him going to the building with the bomb, red-handed, big spotlight, hero moment, headlines, bing, 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 to help, counter the story of what happened with Ruby Ridge and Waco, that the ATF they would get their man and they would be heroes. But in order to do it, they had to have the splashy headline. They could have gotten him at the motel very easily. They could have got him driving to the building, but it wouldn't be as flashy as if he was at the location, this very famous location on this very famous day, which they're executing somebody else in that community on this same day. I mean, all these things line up very nicely for a moving moment.
Yeah, and if you read Kathy Sanders' book, who she lost her two grandchildren
Yeah.
in the bombing, and she's never stopped asking questions. She did her own investigation, like absolute hero. We wouldn't know a lot of what
Oh, yeah.
we know if not for her family asking questions about why the ATF wasn't in the building in the days after.
And why was the bomb squad standing by? Multiple witnesses had reported the bomb squad, and I believe it was Kathy Sanders that started that whole track. Her and her late husband, Glenn Wilbur.
Yeah.
There was a survivors meeting, of the family members, and at the meeting, multiple people who were witnesses at the time said, "Why was the bomb squad there?"
Yeah.
And Glenn recorded this and then confronted the police chief about it. And that's what started her whole investigation, was that big question. Why was the bomb squad standing by? And then you pointed out the ATF. That's absolutely fascinating too, especially when you had two agents try to put themselves into the building, claiming to be in the elevator with one, and I think another one who did a heroic effort by karate chopping his way through walls or something to get out. But and was so bloody he could barely get around, but the videos of him outside shaking hands, seemed to challenge his narrative.
Yeah, and that's kind of what started the whole snowball effect of what we know now about Oklahoma City. But Kathy just came out with a book where she has a really compelling scene about this undercover
Mhm.
FBI operative placing a transponder on the Ryder truck that was parked out of McVeigh's Dreamland Motel, which he had, I think he rented that Ryder truck that was parked out there maybe like April 16th, like just a couple days before the attack. But we know for sure that there were at least two Ryder trucks because there were credible reports of people seeing it the Sunday before at Geary State Park, I think it is. And
Right, that's where they were assembling, the ANFO supposedly.
yep. And we know this is credible because it was Easter Sunday, and there's a lot of people who remember it vividly. And later, the feds had set up a kind of a roadblock questioning people about this.
Now,
So,
wasn't there something about the, truck having mechanical issues and he swapped it out or something of that sort?
oh, that could be the official excuse. I wasn't aware of that. That's
Well, that could put the transponder in the wrong place.
sure. Uh,
So I don't know, but if for some reason and everything blurs because I'm consuming so much information at one time that I like hear little pieces and am trying to. I guess I'm kind of building a quilt here. It's just
oh, it's
a lot
crazy. I
to
mean,
it.
studying this case since late 2021. I wrote my first article. It's actually framed behind me. That's Jesse Trenadu in the frame photo. That was my first article about PATCON that I published in early 2022, and I'm still learning about this case just about every single day. Every book I read is another piece to the puzzle. Um, but yeah, we also have reports about uh, people with these hoops the night before the bombing, which would be used to track a transponder. So there's a lot of compelling reasons to believe that the feds had a transponder in one of the Ryder trucks, but the neo-Nazis knew about it somehow, and they had the truck with the transponder take the feds off on a wild goose chase while McVeigh and John Doe 2 go into Oklahoma City on the morning of April 19th. And then at 9:02, the truck bomb goes off, kills 168 people at least, including 19 children in the daycare. And it's been a cover up ever since.
Yes, and it's funny that I don't know why, but I studied different things, and before I got hijacked into this case by Margaret Roberts' book, Blowback, I was researching very deeply Robert Hansen. And Robert Hansen was the notorious CIA, no, sorry, FBI traitor. He was a spy for the Soviet Union. Interestingly, one of the items he gave to the Soviet Union was the FBI had developed a tracker like an Easy Pass. And I can't help but go, he got busted in 2001. This is 1995. What are the odds, do you think, that this Easy Pass tracker invention may in fact be what they were trying to track? Like when you use an Easy Pass, right? You're driving down the road and then there's some sort of monitor and it trips. Well, if maybe they had to have like the portable readers and they're going around trying to see if they can pick up this Easy Pass.
That's fascinating. One of the things in Margaret's book that is also tied to this is a former intelligence guy and journalist named Roger Charles noticed that an article in the mid 2000s was about how the FBI has these outdated transponders that are too easy for the bad guys to detect, and they needed something more covert. And Roger, who was a great guy, he was actually one of the first people I interviewed about this whole case. He believes that they probably felt the need to update it for, among other reasons, because of the Oklahoma City catastrophe.
Roger Charles is a giant figure in here, and I believe you actually were possibly his last interview ever given. I also want to point out, and I meant to say it earlier, I noticed that your handle on X is JD Cashless, which I feel could be an homage to JD Cash, who worked hand in hand with Roger Charles, actually, and was one of the major, probably the earliest important journalists covering the story in
Oh,
Oklahoma
yeah.
City.
JD Cash is my absolute hero. Uh, Not only for this story, but just overall, I kind of identify him as kind of working for an obscure site, Headline USA, but still beating a lot of the mainstream media on a lot of the biggest stories, including the Trump assassination attempts. Like I was the guy that got Thomas Brooks's autopsy. I got 911 calls, like all his internet, or not all his internet history, but a lot of records that the New York Times, Washington Post kind of slept on. So he's kind of my hero. And I put the Cash list because I would say I'm a poor man's version of JD Cash because he's just an absolute giant. And his first major story that kind of followed what we were talking about earlier about Kathy Sanders and her husband catching the ATF in their lies and the bomb squad being stationed on the morning of April 19th. Well, JD Cash, he does a big story maybe a couple weeks or a couple months later on seismograph data suggesting that there may have been actually two explosions in the Murrah building. The significance of that is unclear. Some people theorize that they may have had C4 plastered inside to make the blast even worse. A more innocuous or
Could also be gas buildup in the building that could have got a secondary explosion or something, I'm guessing.
yeah, and what I think at the very least, the ATF was found to have been storing weapons that they had seized right above the daycare, just being totally negligent. So, and we have reports of them actually taking a tow missile out of the building in the aftermath. That's one of the reasons why they were telling first responders, like, hey, you have to hold on, we got to get stuff out. And I think it
Yeah, there's a conspiratorial side on that one too. And Kathy Sanders covers in her book, Shadows of a Conspiracy. And that is, at that exact same time they were keeping the first responders away, they were removing cameras from the building.
Yeah, and they're even crazier conspiracy. Well, first of all, I shouldn't loop that in because I don't think that's crazy at all. That's but the crazy conspiracy theory is that the Whitewater Clinton investigation documents are in that building, and they had to get those out. It's like, guys, there would be a lot easier way to like destroy documents that.
Also, Gulf War syndrome documents were in the building is another one.
So I think that's a lot more dubious. Like, I don't see why they would have had to take those documents out. It's not like some local guy would have found them and blew up the cases. But um, yeah, any event, getting back to JD Cash and Roger Charles, JD Cash breaks this big story about the seismograph data. He eventually gets a lot of tips about Elohim City. He winds up going there. He actually I wouldn't say befriends, but kind of ingratiates himself with the group because he was a good old boy from Oklahoma, a hard drinker. He could actually hang out with them. He knew a lot of the history of the order from the 80s, so he could kind of speak their language. And that's how he got all these amazing bombshell stories that he would publish over the years. And he linked up with Roger Charles, who was a producer for ABC at the time, which was investigating it. They got some of their stories killed, but Roger got so hooked on this story that he ended up working with JD Cash, and they were supposed to publish a book together in the late 2000s. But JD Cash unfortunately died, so Roger Charles went on to publish his book with a sort of more mainstream journalist named Andrew Gumbel. The title of that book is Oklahoma City, What the Investigation Missed, Why It Matters. It really is a great book. There is some holes in it, but I would say I would point to that book if any uninitiated people want to get involved in the case. That would probably be the first book that I would recommend.
British. His co-author was British. John Ronson is British. One of the best documentaries on this case is British. It seems like some of the information here has almost been suppressed, but if you want to kind of get a look at things, there are people from outside the country who have investigated and written it out, including that co-author as an example, and also Pritchard, who wrote the book about
Yes.
Clinton family. Um, Again, something Ambrose Pritchard, is that right?
Ambrose Evans Pritchard, I think his name
Okay,
is.
something like that. Again, I just wanted to point that out because I thought that was interesting and like a case of, Lori Fortier. You want to have some fun? Go look for a picture of her. I will end up finding a picture of her on the BBC. Nothing here. And I feel like her and Michael Fortier going into witness protection, that perhaps the word is put out and they've been scrubbed from the internet. But anyway, I digressed a little bit. I just wanted to point out something about the odd British angle. And Strassmeir also, I think he was tied in with the army in England a little.
Well, and I think he
Yeah.
dated a BBC reporter at one point, so which is another odd thing. That's when Jesse Trentadue was trying to get him to sign a privacy waiver that would have allowed Jesse to get all the FBI documents that they have on him. He was going through this British lady who was Strassmeier's girlfriend at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the story just captured the world's imagination. You also had the whole the fact that the IRA in Ireland used truck bombs. The ARA was kind of a that whole the name, the Aryan Republican Army, was an ode to the IRA.
Yeah, and their methodology is an ode to Point Break.
Yeah, exactly. And even in the ARA propaganda videos, they have a Tom Clancy song, or not Tom. I think yeah, not the author, but I think there's like an Irish guy who sings like rebel IRA songs. That's like kind of playing in the background before that they talk. They get kind of like their manifesto recorded. It's the video. It's the one that Margaret talks about. Jesse gave a copy to her too, and it's really yeah, it's not the most interesting thing. It's like about an hour long, and at first, it's pretty intriguing. Like they're wearing masks and they're sitting at their desks, kind of brandishing weapons and talking about their goals. But then it kind of just, I think Margaret even talks about it in her book. It's rambling. It's not very concise, and they're kind of like jokey. It's kind of a bizarre video.
Okay. I definitely will be checking that out. Okay, so now going forward, see this is such a rabbit hole. You can tell how many side
It's
directions it is insane. But moving forward, PATCON itself, post Oklahoma City, you said that the PATCON operation allegedly had ended or was supposed to have ended after Waco or prior to Waco. What is the status of PATCON?
PatCon officially ended after Waco, but the informants were all still running. So they might have changed the name. And you got to think the notion that the FBI would scale back its infiltration operations after Waco when they know they just kicked a hornet's nest is just totally implausible. They would never do that.
If I'm to understand, I believe Jesse stated that they give like sister operations similar names, that they kind of all run together, and then the focus on this, like OK Bomb. Now that was the case after the fact, but could that be the case that PATCON really became X operation, X operation, X operation, X operation, and they just start them up and down accordingly, like Fast and Furious being one of these
Oh,
potentially.
sure. Also in the 90s, you had something called VATCON, which was violence against abortion providers, because there were legitimate attacks on abortion clinics back then. The funny thing that ties that into Oklahoma City is that there's an FBI agent named Danny Colson. He was actually started the hostage rescue team. He's kind of a legendary guy. He was involved in the raid on CSA, and we have receipt of him be checking into a hotel the night before April 19th, the night before the bombing. And the official FBI records have him as part of this VATCOM operation. So the significance of that again is unclear, but it's an interesting little tie there.
Well, Colson, I really would love to talk to at some point too, especially because his career seemed to take a radical turn. And from what I understand, after the Oklahoma City bombing, he wanted a grand jury to investigate what happened, with all the different players. And he was immediately put on ice and essentially just kind of frozen in place until he could retire a couple years later.
Yeah, I've got a little bit more dimmer view on Danny Colson. I think he's kind of a limited hangout. He does admit that, like, 22 people or whatever saw John Doe 2.
Mhm.
That's too many to be a coincidence, and we should investigate this further. But I mean, Roger Charles would tell me that he's conflicted because I do think he knows actually what happened. He knows it was a botched sting operation at the very least, and he does feel a little bit guilty. But I wouldn't be surprised if he was spying on people like Kathy Sanders to see, what do the researchers know. And Yeah, I could say that for several reasons, but among that is in 2020 after the Whitmer kidnapping case, you'll find articles where Danny Coulson is justifying that as a legitimate operation, and he's saying like, "Oh, every militia guy always says they're entrapped, but that's the FBI doesn't really do that, and we think the Whitmer kidnapping case is totally legit." So he does like to play both sides of the
Mm.
fence, and I talked to him a couple years ago, and when I brought up this case, or when I brought up him being in Oklahoma City the night before, he kind of freaked out, and he had attorneys write a stern letter to my publisher at the time, the Epic Times, pretty much threatening legal action if we touched the story. So I'm not exactly friends with Danny Coulson, and I do view him with suspicion.
You're not friends with Bob Ricks either, right?
Yeah. Well, Danny Coulson actually put me in touch with Bob Ricks. I originally tried to talk to Danny because at the time, I viewed him as a white hat because I had seen uh, all the stuff where he's calling for a reopen of the investigation and about John Doe too. And he tells me, well, you should talk to Bob Ricks instead of me. Like, I don't really want to talk about this. And then Bob Ricks totally takes the FBI's position that uh, it was McVeigh was a lone wolf who might have had a little bit of help from Terry Nichols and 48, but that's pretty much the extent of it, according to Bob.
One thing I ran this by Margaret, and I'll run it by other people. I have trouble with the idea that Terry Nichols is this meek mannered, uh, Ichabod character. Just I don't know. I feel like there's more importance with Terry Nichols than he allows to get out, and I'm very troubled, for example, of his trips to the Philippines. And there is actually a congressional report writing about how is Terry Nichols, Ramsey Youssef, and Khalid Mohammed, or I don't know if I'm saying that right, KSM, in the same little tiny suburb of Manila, I believe it's Manila, Philippines, at the same time. Everywhere in the world, these people. And by the way, he's near Ramsey Youssef again right now. I think he's down the hall on Bombers Row. But anyway, am I off base to wonder if what if we reversed the roles here? What if the person in charge? I was in the army, and a lot of times the commander's not the one who's out there in the field. Soldiers are out there in the field, and Timothy McVeigh was a soldier. I think that nobody would argue with that he was a soldier, and he, in my opinion, was the type that you tell him, you do this, you take that there, and he takes it there. Not necessarily like the guy in charge, but the guy who will follow every order to a T and is very reliable. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts about my questions?
I think they're legitimate questions, and the whole Philippines angle is definitely a blind spot. As far as my research goes, I don't know a whole lot about it, but you got to remember that Nichols. So, for people who don't know the basics, him, 48, and McVeigh were all in the same army unit, and it was actually kind of like an experimental unit, in that throughout their whole tour through the military, they stuck together. I guess, well, you probably know better than me, but typically in the military, you could get transferred here, there, and everywhere. You get
It depends on your MOS. As an example, my last job in the army was a cargo specialist, and there's only two places in the world at that time it could be, which is Fort Eustis and Fort Story, Virginia. So people would sit there in the same duty station for 20 years and know the same people. So they might move like from one company to another company or whatever, but they still drive to work every day, and they know each other, have long relationships. So again, it depends on the job.
Okay, got it, got it. But the reason I bring that up is because Terry Nichols is actually 10 years older than McVeigh and 48. People, I think, referenced him as kind of like grandpa within the unit. And I forget what book I'm reading. I've read so many books now that, yeah, the facts are starting to get jumbled. But when you read a lot of the research, you'll say, oh, McVeigh was very domineering and kind of bullied Nichols around. But one of the books I read actually says it the opposite, where Nichols was kind of bullied or was looked up to by McVeigh. I'm,
especially early on. And I got the
yeah.
impression that McVeigh, when he joined the army, Nichols took him under his wing. Like he looked up to Sergeant Nichols at the time. I think Nichols had more rank too.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And these are reasons why to doubt that he was some sort of lamb being led to the slaughter. Although I will say that McVeigh tried to set up Nichols as a patsy because when he rented, what was it, the hotel, he used Nichols' brothers at
Mhm.
the Michigan, which is like total bad OPSEC. So it's
Which is weird. Okay, there are questions on that too. Why wouldn't he just sign in as Terry Nichols? Why wouldn't he sign in? He rented the truck under the name like Sprague or something. Why didn't he use that name to check into the hotel or that motel? It really is baffling to use his real name and a real address like that when he has enough operational sense to use a fake ID when he's renting the truck.
Again, these are a lot of confounding questions. I mean, we don't even know if McVeigh was the guy to rent the Ryder truck on
Right.
April 17th. Um, like we have that's where we get the sketches of John Doe 2 and John Doe 1. But John Doe 1 is listed at like 5'9" when Timothy McVeigh was a gangly, skinny 6'2" guy. And so the face actually could be one of the Ward brothers who were white supremacists who were linked to Elohim City too. We don't even know if it was McVeigh. So maybe see, I might be mixing up my facts now, but maybe somebody else put McVeigh's name. So, you know,
That would be there you go. That could be really interesting, and good point. And that's why I'm asking these questions. Also, I think the mess with John Doe 1 and 2 and stuff is if he was in fact working with a team, he could have been next to one person at one point and another person at another point, and witnesses could have, different, things because I think there are supposedly John Does 3 and 4 out there too. Like, they don't there are, differing descriptions of people from that morning, or am I wrong?
no, you're absolutely right. There's a guy who identified himself. He was having coffee with McVeigh, Nichols, and I think he referred to himself as Robert Jocks. And that's another possible candidate for John Doe 2. So yes, multiple John Doe 2s are swirling around, leading up. I think there's hundreds of witnesses who saw McVeigh with other people. So on April 19th, we have these 22 witnesses who saw John Doe 2, but we've got way more than that in the weeks leading up to April 19th. Um, Going back to Nichols, like I said, the whole Middle Eastern possible connection is kind of my blind spot, but I do think that there actually might be something there. And the book that I would recommend, I just started reading it a couple weeks ago, is called I Heard You Were Going on Jihad, which is about Oklahoma's connections to sort of radical Islamic terrorism. And like I said, I only just started it. I'm reading like 5 books at a time, but it's very compelling because it goes through the history of Oklahoma's connection to Saudi Arabia because they've got the oil connection. So a lot of the Saudis and other Middle Easterners would go to Tulsa or Oklahoma City to attend university to study the business. And so you've got kind of how a lot of those guys ended up in Oklahoma. And then there's a guy named Ali Muhammad who was an FBI informant infiltrated in Al Qaeda. We think he might be actually a double or triple agent. He was kind of playing both sides, but he was active at the time. Of course, yeah, you have Terry Nichols going to the Philippines at the same time. Ramzi Youssef was over there.
Also,
And
one thing about Terry Nichols and why I'm harping on it so much is Margaret Roberts got to interview him
Mhm.
with Jesse Trentadue, and they both, they confirmed Philippines shut down, not a topic. No, he would
Yeah.
not talk about it. So why? Why? You're going to talk about everything else, but you won't talk about the Philippines. And his ex-wife talked about him having gold bullion, I believe, that she had discovered when he left some stuff or whatever, letters from McVeigh she had opened, I think found gold bullion and other stuff. Well, one of my earliest girlfriends after high school, her father worked in Saudi Arabia as a geologist, and she had like this really beautiful gold puzzle ring, and she was talking about how gold is just common there. It was actually,
Hmm.
pretty cheap to get the ring. It was a gift or something like that. But it always stuck in my head because her ring, and we were poor, we had to pawn it a couple times, so we know exactly how valuable it was. It was a very, very high purity of gold because there's just a ton of gold in Saudi. And I hear that and I'm going, maybe it wasn't only the ARA that was helping fund Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols' lifestyle. Perhaps there could have been money coming in from the Middle East and billionaires.
Perhaps, although there is a tie to PatCon and the gold business. Interestingly enough, a guy who he wound up in the Cayman Islands, and he's dead now, but he was involved in PatCon and Iran Contra in the 80s. And one of his businesses was he would dive for treasure, and he was pretty good at it. And he acquired quite a lot of lost gold, and so that's just because he was involved in PatCon. The guy's name is
It's not Roger Moore, is it?
no, but
Okay.
he was in the Tennessee area, involved in a gun rights group that was under investigation during PatCon, and
Is that who you asked Strassmeir about? Doc something or another?
he knew Doc O'Grady, I think his name is. See,
Okay.
yeah, all this stuff is kind of blurry because I'm working on a book about the Trump assassination, so I apologize. I don't have
No worries.
it figures directly off the tip of my tongue. But yeah, I would just recommend people look up. I heard you were going on Jihad. It's by Mitchell Gray. If people want to explore more of a possible Middle East connection to the bombing, it also touches on Oklahoma did have real solid links to 9/11 too. So there is something going on there. I think that needs to be explored. I think one of the reasons why people just reject it offhand is because there's a reporter named Jana Davis who wrote a book called The Third Terrorist. And we had researchers, a guy named Richard Booth, actually caught her uh, kind of fabricating a witness statement.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah, kind of people dismiss that whole entire line of research into possible Middle East connections because Jana Davis's book is pretty dubious. But just because one book is bad doesn't mean the whole thing is illegitimate.
No, I mean that's good to know, and I didn't need to know that. There's a lot of people, yeah, and I believe he's done a lot of work. Richard Booth,
Richard Booth, yeah.
OKC Facts Substack. I think he's put out a ton of material there that people might want to check out. Um, okay, so where are we? We have gone down some trails. So now after Oklahoma City, I'm guessing things either quieted down or what happened. Is it a case of 9/11 just diverting all operations another way while we had a new president, a new focus of the administration? So instead of homegrown terrorists, we are shifting to Middle East terrorists for a while. Is that what happened? Was there a pause?
Yeah, I think that could be a really plausible explanation. Also, the bombing made it a lot more unpopular to be associated with the radical right. I think it's a lot of steam out of the movement. This book that we were talking about by David Hall and his handler, Into the Devil's Den, is post Oklahoma City. And it's like the Kehoe brothers are still on the loose. The Aryan
Who
Nation's
are they?
still a thing. The Kehoe brothers are people tied to Elohim City that they murdered a gun dealer named Robert Mueller and stole a bunch of his stuff. And they were on the lam for several years. And they were infamous in a TV show. What was it, Cops or something? Because they got into a shootout with an Ohio State trooper, and it's
Oh,
on the dash cam where the trooper and these guys are shooting at each other at almost point blank range, and they escaped. Nobody was killed in that shootout, but that was like in the opening credits of, I think, Cops for years.
It was just after 1:30 when the officer pulled over the blue Chevy Suburban with Washington state plates for a traffic violation. Neither man in the vehicle could produce ID, so the officer asked the driver to step out of the car. The man told the officer he borrowed the truck from a friend. He then refused to a pat-down search. The man ran back to his car in an attempt to get away. The passenger then opened fire on the police.
So this book, which is absolutely must read for the larger PATCON story, goes into the post Oklahoma City era where this stuff is really winding down. And one of the other interesting aspects is that this book goes into supposedly Aryan Nations was still trying to bomb the Earl Cable Federal Building in Dallas, Texas. And the FBI claims in this book that they foiled that plot. I don't think it was legitimate at all, but the actual really interesting thing is that John Matthews, the FBI informant involved in PATCON, had told Jesse Trenadu that PATCON was an operation where there were multiple plans to attack federal buildings, not just the Murrah building in Oklahoma City. And I think they wanted to bust up like 3 or 4 of these plots and make the headlines. But then after Oklahoma City, they're like, oh, we got to scrap this operation. This is insane. But they do talk about a plot to attack a federal building in Dallas, Texas. So yeah, it winds down. As you say, 9/11 takes place, and the FBI diverts a lot of its, almost all of its counterterrorism resources towards the Muslims. But a lot of my original research goes into, like my Oklahoma City reporting is standing on the backs of giants, but I've actually uncovered an operation under Robert Mueller in the mid 2000s to stage Nazi rallies throughout the country. It was a front group called the National Socialist Movement, which was founded by an FBI informant, led by an FBI informant throughout the 2000s. And so there's not a whole lot of violence going on, but they're still keeping the Nazi movement alive. And the interesting thing about that is every time they held a rally, it would actually increase the number of card-carrying Nazis. This is like the FBI says this in its own records. So the movement's kept alive, and then like the violence gets ramped back up in the 2010s.
well, and I was going to say, coincidentally, the same people who fell out of power when Bush came in were suddenly back. I mean, Eric Holder is right there. I mean, same guy, from 95. Now, all of a sudden, he's coming back ultimately to become Attorney General. But I believe he was an assistant Attorney General. He was working Fast and Furious, which is a complete echo of what was going on in the 90s. So,
Yeah, it was a lot of the same government officials came back to power. And meanwhile, again, I'll just cite this book again. A lot of the actual Nazis were still around from the PATCON era. Specifically, one character in this book, his name is Maurice Goulet, and he's a target of the FBI in the 90s, according to this book. And then in the early 2000s, he gets entrapped by another FBI informant named Joshua Caleb Sutter, who got him tricked into gun charges. And Joshua Caleb Sutter is one of the most interesting characters today because he's still an active FBI informant. You might see seen headlines a couple years ago about this white supremacist slash Satanist who operates a bookstore out of his mobile home in South Carolina where he sells satanic literature. It's a group called the Order of Nine Angles. He started the American chapter of this Satanist group in the 2010s. And it's just when I read that he helped put away a guy who was involved in PATCON, that really clicked a lot of things to me that like PATCON never ended. It's this Sutter guy is still continuing PATCON type operations to this day, and he's got direct ties to the original PATCON. He infiltrated Atomwaffen, which is like a neo-Nazi group in the late 2010s that was a lot of like guys who were active duty military. They were pretty much caught trying to plot attacks on military bases under the auspices of like drawing us back into a hot war in the Middle East. Like a lot of goofy stuff that really didn't result into anything compared to Waco or Oklahoma City. But it's like it's all been simmering very much kind of underneath the main national spotlight until pretty much Charlottesville. Then it all really explodes and becomes nationally prominent again. And Charlottesville, one of the groups there was this National Socialist Movement, which is the FBI front group that was staging Nazi rallies in the mid 2000s.
I think we've got a small world issue here.
Yeah.
Is Jeff Shep?
Jeff Scoop, I think is how you pronounce his
Jeff
name.
Scoop?
Yeah.
I've interviewed him twice. I know him.
You have? Oh, no. Did you know
So,
he's a FBI informant? Did you know that when you interviewed him?
no, I do know that he's reformed, and he works with like, different hate groups and things like that, and tours his book, that he gave up that whole life and he quit that world and stuff. So
I think that's his golden parachute. That's kind of his official story. He led the NSM. He was involved in staging these Nazi rallies in the mid 2000s, including one in Toledo, which was the most violent. It ended up in the most violent race riot in Ohio history, I think, where all these black people like attacked the Nazis because they were marching through their neighborhood, and that wound up really boosting the NSM's membership. So yeah, getting a little more history in his group. His group was actually founded in the 70s by some guy who's named Robert Brandon, who's a confirmed FBI informant, and it was eventually passed to Jeff Scoop. But in the mid 2000s, we had another Nazi rally organized in Orlando, Florida, and the permit was signed by David Gleddy, who's a confirmed FBI informant. Another Nazi rally in Albany, New York, by a guy named Hal Turner, who is a confirmed FBI informant. Hal Turner made headlines for threatening Obama during that whole era. So the NSM is totally an FBI front group. And I interviewed Scoop too, and he actually threatened me when I was going to out him as an informant, saying, "You're lucky I'm reformed, because if I wasn't, you might get a visit to your house." So he's kind of a clown, but I think after Charlottesville, when he got sued and everything, he kind of got deactivated.
okay, well, like I said, it's a small world. I had reached out early on to ask about the ARA, and he didn't know that much about him. He was saying, but he did say that Scott Stedford asked him to stop selling his albums, or something like that. So very interesting. Very interesting. All right. Well, this is, I think, a perfect stopping point. I'd love to have you back at some point. And I don't know if you're ever available to do like a Q&A with the audience. I think that might be a cool thing. You obviously have so many random facts in what you're doing. I'd love to have you back for a Q&A.
Oh, I'd be happy to. Yeah, for sure. Anytime.
Now, I like to ask this. I haven't for the past few, but what is the one question that you've been waiting for somebody to ask you? You know, like you've done interviews about this, you've talked to different people. What am I leaving on the table? What's the one burning question that I should be asking you right now?
Well, we kind of just touched on it. My most original research has to do with the fact that PATCON continued through Charlottesville with this Joshua Caleb Sutter guy. So I didn't articulate it as quite as well as I would have liked, but I think that's kind of the main thing that people should realize. We were going to touch on the Whitmer plot, and I do have a little bit of different thoughts. I don't think that's directly like PATCON. I think in a lot of ways it's more nefarious because at least with PATCON, the FBI was targeting actual violent skinhead Nazis who were all like criminal guys. But the Whitmer plot is a little bit different in that these were kind of normies who were just maybe radicalized by the COVID.
Loudmouths, maybe.
Uh, but I think that's like a point that I like to bring up that a lot of people usually don't think about is the taxonomy of these militia groups. They're not all like PATCON Nazi type things. I think the Whitmer thing in a lot of ways more nefarious because they were going after just normal citizens.
You know, and thank you for bringing that up. And that is something I do try to focus on because you can go too far, in my opinion, one way or another. These were not nice people. A lot of the people at Elohim City are not nice people. And it's one of the cases from what I'm seeing there's bad people on both sides. There were some bad moves by the government and, you know, maybe that was it. You know, they're playing dirty to get dirty people in their mind, whatever, justifying it. But thank you for bringing that up. I think that we should, you know, at least acknowledge that, you know, like Timothy McVeigh was a monster. You know, you know, I don't, I get a little frustrated with he was just a patsy, poor guy. It's like, no, he killed a lot of people. He was very proud of killing those people. How many times did he say 168 to 1? I mean,
Yeah.
this is a cold-blooded killer. And I think we should always focus on that. So thank you so much for coming by and doing this. And I hope to have you back and at least do a live stream. I think that's the best way to do it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Anytime. And like I said, if I sounded disjointed at certain points, I've been focusing 90% of my bandwidth on the Trump assassination attempts. So if you ever really want to get into that, I have a book that should be coming out in about a month or two. It's actually called The Trump Assassination Attempts, What the Investigations Missed and Why It Matters, which is an ode to Roger
Charles.
Great book. So thanks again for having me. This is a great conversation to get my mind back thinking about this PATCON stuff.